Hi, good evening. Good evening, everybody. I'm Gina Duvernay, the Adult Services Manager for Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm not going to be up here long because you're not here for me. I'm going to read these bios and we'll get started to hear our featured author for the evening. But tonight, our moderator is Rosalind Metz. You can wave so everybody can see you. She is the Chief Technology Officer for Libraries and Museums at Emory University in Atlanta, where she leads technology initiatives and contributes to open source projects to support libraries. Yay! She lives with her sassy 9-year-old daughter, Genevieve, her nerdy husband, Eston, and her cheese-loving dog, Nolly. I like your dog already. And our featured author is Kimberly Brock. Kimberly, wave at all the people. And she's a best-selling author of The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare and her award-winning debut, The River Witch, which was honored with the Georgia Author of the Year Award in 2013 by the Georgia Writers Association. A former actor and special needs educator, Kimberly received a bachelor's degree from the University of West Georgia in 1996. In 2014, she founded Tinderbox Writers Workshop, a transformative creative experience for women in the arts. Kimberly has served as a guest lecturer for many regional and national groups, including the Women's Fiction Writers Annual Conference and the Pat Conroy Literary Center. A native of North Georgia, she now lives near Atlanta, Georgia. Let's give her a round of applause.
Well, first, I want to thank Gina and Amy and everybody in the libraries for helping this come together. So maybe I just wanted to start, because I am not going to assume that everybody here has read the book yet, although maybe you all have. No? Okay. Good. So I'm gonna do a little bit of read a couple of reviews just so you can get an understanding of it. And the first question that I'm going to ask Kimberly will sort of lay the groundwork for what the book is. So the first review is from Booklist. In her third novel, Brock proves marvelously adept at intertwining mythic stories and contemporary reality and showing how two people reconciled the two. While tackling issues of race and class prejudice, Brock's lush, multi-layered writing begs to be read slowly as she gently unfolds the mysteries of this picturesque yet haunted southern landscape, where once elegant Carnegie mansions still stand, an ideal choice for admirers of Delia Owens, Sarah Loudon Thomas, and Sarah Addison Allen. The next one is from Sarah Addison Allen. She is a New York Times bestselling author and the author of Other Birds. The Fabled Earth is lush and vivid, with passages so beautiful they will break your heart and then turn around and mend it. The lines blur between magic and mystery, that's so true, pulling you into a dreamy, immersive experience. It's a tour de force of a novel. You can always tell a born storyteller when you read one, and Kimberly Brock is the real deal. So Kimberly, I thought we could start with the first question, which will be a little bit more about plot. The story unfolds through the perspective of three women across two timelines. The first timeline being 1932, and the second one being 1959. It follows, in 1932, a hunting party involving the wealthy Carnegie family, which takes a tragic turn. It leaves the members of the party with shattered lives and buried secrets. In 1959, we return to Cumberland Island, and for those of you who may not know, Cumberland Island, Georgia, with Cleo, one of the members of the hunting party. She is a reclusive painter and a survivor of the 1932 events. She is visited by someone from her past, leading to a confrontation with long hidden truths. So these intertwined timelines reveal a powerful narrative of love, loss, and the complex dynamics of race and class in the South. So Kimberly, could you share some of the most rewarding aspects of developing these characters and how you ensured each voice was distinct and authentic to the period.
I feel like I'm taking a test. Like I just drove in and here you go. We got the biggest question you've ever been asked in your life. I first of all, I have to say that Sarah Addison Allen quote, I always, when I hear that, she's the real deal,
The real
right?
deal, yeah.
I want a t-shirt that says that.
Says the real deal.
And the other thing is when she says you're a born storyteller, all I can think is, I remember getting in trouble when I was little for lots of storytelling, and it wasn't always a good thing, right? Okay, developing the characters. What was most rewarding about this? Well, my three main characters, there are 3 point of view characters in this novel, and they're all 3 female. And they're at different stages in their lives. And so it was fun, you know, to see. I see Cleo in 1932 as a young woman, and she's very optimistic, and she's kind of dreamy all in her head. And then by the time I meet her again in 1959, she's a grouch, and she's been living almost 30 years on this island by herself. And I always tell people, when I write, it's like when I draft. And you first get to know your character, it's like you're looking in a mirror at yourself and having a conversation. Because all your characters are, you know, subliminally, they're you, and one way or the other, they've got to come from you. And most of the time, that's a lot of fun. With Cleo in 1959, I felt like I was looking at the back of her head. Like she didn't want anything to do with me. I couldn't get into her. I couldn't understand her, except that she just didn't care. She didn't want to have a conversation with me. She was a recluse.
Yeah.
So flipping back to the events of 1932 and meeting her as a younger woman kind of allowed me in the door with the older Cleo. I already knew the secrets. And so I started writing her in 1959, and then I had to go back. And I always think I'm going to write one timeline, and it always ends up being a dual timeline. I think it's something about how I learned to tell stories. Maybe it's about being a Southerner. You don't ever tell a story in a straight line.
No.
You tell a story that says, here's the story I'm telling you, but you remember when? Or, you know, Mama said, and you have to reflect on something in the past. We like the past a lot in the South and in families. We want to navel gaze a lot, I think. Think about what came before, whether it's things that we romanticize or the truth, right? So for me, the development of these characters had a lot to do with that, with who they are right now, and then the younger characters trying to get to know who they are now based on who and what their mothers were doing during that 1932 period.
Yeah, I would say one of the things I noticed too, you saying that it's like having a conversation with yourself, was Frances in Googling and reading. Frances seemed like she might be you in a way.
Bit.
Yeah,
They're all me though. That's the thing.
Sure,
They're all me. Everybody always asks.
But I mean, it's like you now, right? In that, because it definitely is clear that you're a storyteller to me from just what I have learned. And Frances, one of the main characters, is also a storyteller, she's a folklorist. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I get to meet Frances.
A little bit. You know, Frances Flood is, so the event that takes place in 1932, Frances's mother is present for that. And her life takes a tragic turn, as Cleo's does, after 1932. And Frances doesn't know the ins and outs of what happened then, and her mother has died and sent her to Cleo to have a painting in memory, right? And she has all these questions for Cleo Woodbine. Frances knows that her mother was always a bit obsessed with a bit of folklore from Germany that she learned from her mother. And it plays a role in what happens in 1932. It is a story about a woman named the Lorelei and she is a mermaid, and not a very nice one. And so this tragic bit of folklore is the story that's told that night in 1932. But Frances doesn't know that. She doesn't understand why it's been important to her mother. And so when she comes to talk to Cleo, that's like a point of interest and a point or an entrance. Who is my mom? What's this going to finally tell me, the secrets of my mother? And I guess that's what I do, right? I try and understand the world and the people around me through story. I think we hide a lot of our truths in story.
Yes, we do.
And that was like the big question in the book, was about story, and in particular ghost stories. So, yeah.
One thing that I learned about Kimberly in prepping, which
This is scary. I have no idea.
There's no telling. I literally ran into my bed. My husband was in bed reading. I ran in. I was like, "You would not believe what I just found out." And it was like, "What?" And I was like, "Shh." Kimberly starts apparently her books at the end of the book, and then writes from the beginning. And he was like, "Yeah." And I am one of those people that's like adamant about reading a book from page 1 and go all the way to the end and do not look ahead. Do not even think about looking ahead. And I just thought that was the most fascinating thing and made me rethink how I read books.
Well, I'm so glad that's what you found out, because it could have been a lot of things.
It could have been a lot of things.
I was getting a little worried.
But that was the most, that's the thing that
She's a
interests me
psychopath.
most.
I do. I mean, usually it starts with a setting. It starts with a bunch of stuff, like a setting, and then also a character voice. But I don't come to the voice usually first. Like I'll fill up notepads. I like to write longhand for a while. And those aren't necessarily scenes. They're not even necessarily anything that goes in the book, but they get me to the person that I want to write about. I'll start to hear something when I'm just playing with a scene to see, well, does this work? Does this seem like that's what's going on in this place? And then at some point, when I'm sure about the character, all of a sudden, I know the end. And I think it's because that's what I'm writing toward. That's the point of the book. I need to know the point of the book before I can start the book. So I'll sketch out the last scene. And I feel like y'all are behind me. I'm trying to make sure I remember you over here. I'll sketch that last scene out, and it usually holds together pretty much. Even after lots of revision, that scene is pretty solid because it's how I know it's going to culminate. And once I know that, then I know where to start. So I'll write that end scene, and then I go back to the beginning, and I think I'm going to write it in a straight line, like I said, right? It never works that way. But I will know things that are supposed to happen along the way. I cannot outline fully, or I get bored. And I just don't care anymore. I just don't care anymore. But if I know some things, because I'm just entertaining myself, right? And I will write toward the next thing that I know is going to happen in the book. And if I get stuck in here, I'll jump to that thing and write it. And then it usually, I'll go backwards because it'll fill in. And then go to the next thing until I have a draft. And that's misery. I hate drafting. I write really slow. I don't like it when there's not already a creation. That part of it is really hard for me. Once there is something there, even if it's horrible and ugly, I'm like a pig in mud because I will revise forever. I really like that part of it.
I do too.
Yeah.
I mean, what I write is not very interesting, but.
Don't say that. We've got us on camera.
I mean, it's all technology related. It's not very interesting. Nobody wants to read it. Another question I had for you was about the relationships between the characters. They are very rich and layered, I found, right? The different relationships, how people interact with each other. There are some relationships that I really liked, which I won't talk about right now. But I really like, there's a lot about social class. There's a lot about artistic ambitions, right? Because you have a folklorist in there, but also you have a younger woman too, Audrey, who doesn't know what she wants to do with her life, which is kind of fun in some respects, thinking back to those times when you didn't know what you wanted to do with your life. So I'm curious about how you chose to like balance those different relationships, the relationships people had with each other, what you were hoping to convey through some of those relationships, and if there are ones that are particular favorites for you.
I did like writing Audrey Howell, since you bring her up specifically. So Audrey Howell is a young woman who is a widow, recently widowed. You know how in 1959 you graduated high school, you were already in your wedding dress?
Yep.
Right? So she gets married right out of high school. And then her husband dies a few months later in a tragic accident. And so she's widowed just as quickly. And you're 19, 20 years old. She doesn't even know how to be a woman yet, much less a wife, and much less now a widow. And so she has no idea what to do with herself or who she is. She's not grown up. She still feels like the kid's in town, but they don't think she's a kid in town. She's new in town, so she's actually an outsider in that way too. But she brings with her her little brownie camera from high school. She's been taking pictures for the yearbook. And she takes pictures around this town. And you know, 1959, there's social change happening, but it's just starting to cook. It's not the 60s yet. So what I really wanted to do here with her, because I'm a kid of the 80s. I grew up in North Georgia, in the foothills of Appalachia. What do I know? What do I know about racism and integration? And well, I'll tell you, I know a lot. I didn't think I did, but look around. And I can remember going to the library as a little girl, and the first time I learned about integration, because we didn't have any air conditioning, so we went to the library a lot because it had air conditioning in the summer, and my mother loved to read. But it was in this big old brick house, and there were like big white columns on the front. It was very romantic, beautiful. I loved it. I was probably 4 or 5 years old for this memory. And it had a big staircase inside, and I wanted to go upstairs so bad because I wanted to prowl around. And you couldn't go upstairs. And I got upset and I pitched a fit. And my mom marched me out on the sidewalk, and she said, "You should be glad that you can come in this library, because I can remember when I was growing up, there were people who couldn't come in this library." And that stunned me as a little kid. And then thinking, oh my gosh, what if I couldn't come in the library? And then year after year, I would think about that while I was at the library. And, you know, at some point it became what would I do if I couldn't get into the library? What would I do? And cooking up ideas, my own. And so I wanted to place this young woman in this town, in this moment, not knowing who she is, what she thinks about anything, and suddenly be faced with moments of question, right, to look around and say, what the heck? And I remember the same thing with the theater in town, and Audrey deals with the historic theater. I had a historic theater in my town. And I remember my grandmother telling me it was the first movie I ever went to. I wanted to sit in the balcony, and the balcony was closed. And she said, I remember who used to sit in that balcony. And learning about that and thinking about that, and the little side door, and there was a tunnel that connected the building next door. And so I was always really intrigued with these spaces and these secret histories, but also really upset, because here are these people that I love and who love me and who I believe are good people. Why was this normal? Was it normal, or was it just common? And that feeling, I wanted to explore that feeling for these girls, women in this book, through that lens of my own experience and what I know to write about, because it's relevant today. I still have that feeling today. And so for a reader to be able to read that in a historical fiction and feel that, connect to the feeling of it, the humanity of it, is what I was trying to do. And I think Audrey is the closest to success. I know I'm getting it wrong
Right.
a lot of the time.
Sure.
But maybe because I could identify with my younger self, and she's the youngest character.
Yeah, there is, and I'm not going to spoil it because it's my favorite scene, but there is a scene outside of the theater where Audrey does something and she is the person like I would love to be, right? Like it's like,
Does she do it? I wanted it to be that it's almost an accident. It's not like it's premeditated. You're in a moment. And I think that's real. That's real life. We don't sit around and plan to do something heroic. We make good choices accidentally. We make bad choices accidentally. But you hope that for the people that you care about in your orbit, not a large picture thing, the person that's put right in front of you, what are you going to do in that moment? Yeah. Do you think about yourself or do you think about somebody else?
Yeah, that's the thing that I think, I hope that I am Audrey in those moments because it's hard to do that sometimes.
It is hard to do that.
It's really hard to do that. But she was one of my favorite characters. Okay. And again, I think some of it was like the promise, right? Yeah. Like the promise of I can be the best version of me, even when I think I'm not, because your whole life is in front of you, rather than, where I am right now. Where like the best thing I do some days is cooking. So, yes,
and
right?
Not always very well. And I think sometimes, up until that very scene, there are multiple times when Audrey is encouraging the young boy that she befriends in the novel in the other direction. This is not a good idea. Yeah. We shouldn't be involved. We shouldn't be here doing this. And so it's on the blade of the knife where she has to make a choice.
But it's so funny because all of her actions that she's telling him, not a good idea, all of her other actions say, this is a good idea.
Yeah, she knows.
Yeah, she knows. So the other character that I actually really, really like is Cumberland itself. So I think I said to you just before this that I listened to the book on a drive from here to Charleston. I was heading to a library conference. And I was somewhere in Augusta. It was something, I cannot remember what I was listening to, but I was thinking, this is the point where I could either go north or south. What if I just went south? Because the low country in Charleston is not as good as the low country in Georgia, in my opinion. At any rate, hopefully nobody from South Carolina is watching this. But for those of you who haven't been, which I have not been to Cumberland, although I would love to go, it is Barrier Island. It's the largest barrier island in Georgia. It's the southernmost barrier island. It has wild horses on it, which is really what I want to go see. It has salt marshes, which is my favorite thing when I'm at the beach. And it has giant Carnegie mansions on it. So it's really this combination of human history and wilderness. And the novel's events really do kind of take on that tone of Cumberland. And the setting itself really does feel like a character talking to the other characters in the book. And I think one of the characters in particular, Rosie, Guy, not me.
This is true. And in my very first book, River Witch's main character is Rosalind Byrne.
Oh, really? Yeah. So, but Rosie, Guy, is sort of like the narrator of Cumberland. Like, since Cumberland doesn't have a voice, it's like Rosie is the voice. So I'm curious about how that played into the way you wrote all of the characters. Like the island itself is this character in your novel, and I'm curious about how you developed its voice.
The voice of the island, she says. Let me think. That's kind of deep. So Rosie Devane, his name is Ambrose, and then I nicknamed him Rosie because he leads ghost tours around town. He's a young man who is from there. His family's been there for several generations, and he knows all of the local lore. His father was kind of the local historian, so he knows all the stories. But he has sort of this rosy outlook, right? And he looks at all of it through this rosy outlook. And he is an ambassador for the place. He leads ghost tours. He wants everybody to be happy. He wants everybody to be friendly. He wants to bring tourism to the town. He's very proud of it. He serves in Korea. And at the beginning of the novel, he has come home from Korea with his best buddy from the first integrated troops were Korea, who is a man from Oklahoma who is Cherokee. And they buy the theater in town, the movie theater. They're running the movie theater together. And he has like this idea that it's all going to be grand, that everybody's just going to love them, and it's going to be a love fest, and everybody's going to love the movie theater and all the stories, and he's going to tell all the ghost stories. He thinks stories are going to be welcome, and some stories are not, and some people are not. And so he is starting to deal with that. He also knows some of the ugly history of Cumberland and grapples with that and the memory of it, and it comes more to the forefront for him as he watches his friend deal with some of the issues he has with other locals. Yes. So I think you're making me think about Rosie a little bit differently by saying he's the narrator or he's the voice for Cumberland, because he is, but he's not. He's sort of an unreliable narrator, right? Yes.
Well, you do talk
Cumberland
about that
itself, to me, though, and maybe what you're really, really right about here is, I feel like the South is just a big haunted house. Mm-hmm. It's just full of all kinds of ghosts and ghost stories. And that's where Rosie lives. He tells all the ghost stories in town. He leads that little ghost tour. And so he is the ambassador for Ghost Town in a way, right? Yes. And so that is a neat connection. Cumberland feels very haunted because it is. The history is so long. It goes back to the indigenous people there, and then colonization, the British, the Spanish missions, and then you have the planter history and the plantations, and then you have World War I history that's there, and it's long. It's a long history. It's a cycle that rolls over and over and over, and I really wanted to think about that and that generational thing. The fact that history is so well represented there, and he is the local historian. I wanted readers to feel the soft edges of that place outside of time, because time, it just cycles over and over and over again. Which group of folks come stomping along and stand on it and say, mine, 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 mm-hmm. and who has to move on, and who gets to call it home and who doesn't.
Who doesn't, yeah.
So maybe that's why I chose, and that's what you're because he is the voice for that, for sure. And he's looking at it in a way, I chose that setting I knew that the river there is a salt creek, and so it runs both ways. The tides run both ways. And that was a metaphor for story, obviously. I mean, I've read my Pat Conroy. I know what a river is. So the idea that people exist at a fixed point in life at all times, you're at a fixed point, but we can reflect on the past and dream about a future, and we do it all at the same time, and that's what a story is. It's the most spiritual thing about a human being is a story. Mm-hmm. And that's who Rosie is. That's what he represents in that place. Right. All of those things and the storytelling. So I guess that's why he's the voice of the island.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I'm worried about is it's not going to be as spooky as.
It totally is.
Is it?
It is. So I grew up in right outside of Dalton, in the foothills of Appalachia, right? Mountains. I'm not a coastal girl, but my first trip to the beach was with my dad's best friend had a house down there, and we went down there to go to the beach. I was about 3 years old. And I remember getting to the ocean, and he was on one side of me, and my dad was on the other side of me, holding my hands, jumping me over the waves. So I'm connected. It's very nostalgic to me. And he gave my mother Southern fiction to read. He was a reader. So some of the first novels I read were Southern fiction novels that he had given to my mom. So my storytelling is connected to the two places. But I had never been to Cumberland. He lived on St. Simon's. So we got married in the backyard in 1996. I grew up on a farm. We had a 100-year-old farmhouse, big 100-year-old oak tree, and we had about 25 people there in folding chairs. And it was over in a flash. It was just about secret. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then that was 3 months after that, we heard with everybody else in the world that JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette had been married in a secret wedding on Cumberland Island, Georgia. And I thought, oh, we're just like the Kennedys. And, you know, that's how your stories connect you in weird ways, right? And I didn't think a whole lot about it after that. I was really upset when that plane crash happened. I had bad dreams about it for a while. I don't know why, but because our wedding stories were similar, I felt tender about that, and it connected me to these people that I had nothing in the world in common with. So years and years, so it's our 25th wedding anniversary a few years ago, and my husband, we wanted to do something special, and he got us a weekend at the Grayfield Inn on Cumberland Island. Now, if you know, we dropped a mortgage payment, right? So they built Dungeness Mansion was the first large mansion that they built. And this is not Andrew Carnegie, this is Thomas Carnegie and his wife Lucy. And Thomas died before she ever finished this house. It's a huge Victorian mansion. And then she finished the house and continued to build other houses on the island for her 9 children. So this is quite the lady. And one of them is Grayfield. And it's now an inn. They turned it into an inn in the 60s. So we went to stay at the Grayfield Inn. And I can't camp. See, that's the thing. I have a spinal fusion, so I got to stay at the Grayfield Inn. So we went to stay at the Grayfield Inn. You can't get to the island. You go by boat, and there are no cars. The National Park Service has cars, and some people who live on the island have vehicles, but it's all bicycles and walking and camping. And so the ferry boat for Grayfield is a private boat. And we were the only ones on the boat with the guy who is a Carnegie descendant who runs the inn. So it's quiet. And we're pulling up alongside the island, and there's all the oak trees, the moss.
God, I love that.
It's just spooky while we're pulling up. And all of a sudden I realized this would have been their 25th wedding anniversary too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right. And so all my hair stood up. And I thought, oh, I've been saying I was going to write a ghost story. I guess this is the place. So I can guarantee you, it does not feel real at all. You're totally outside of time. I can't tell you how many times we said to one another, this can't be real. It's very strange.
Yeah.
And beautiful. And you feel very protective of it. I finished this book and I thought, oh no, everybody's going to want to go now. And I don't really want them to. I want to leave it alone. It's beautiful. And at the same time, you need to go and see it. But you will not leave there without feeling like you've witnessed something. You've borne witness to something that should be protected.
Yeah.
It's rare. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Kimberly,
It's
when you
beautiful.
talk about your in town though, where were you talking about in town? In town on Cumberland Island? Was there a town?
Oh, no, the town. So the town, that is a question that I had, because I'm I read on my phone, and because I like to also listen, and I switch back and forth. But one of the great things about reading on my phone is I Google everything, and I couldn't find a town.
There is no town.
So tell me where the town is.
So the way the setting for this novel works is Cumberland is sort of the backdrop with the old gods on the island that are fading away, right? And then Cleo Woodbine lives on a fictional little spit of land off Cumberland called Kingdom Come. Right. And that's actually a name or a nickname for the island that her grandfather gave to the place. Then there is a coastal town that is fictionalized, and it's a kind of a combo of different places, but it's set somewhere around the area of St. Mary's. And it's fictionalized 1959 with a little Main Street, and there's a little inn for people to stay at, and boats come and go. I wanted it to feel like what you imagine a town to be in 1959 on the coast, but to keep the edges soft there too, so that I could fiddle around with it a little bit.
And the name of the town is Reverie. Mm-hmm. So where did that come from?
It's a word for a dream.
Didn't even did not even.
Yep.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I literally almost did take a, what is it? I guess a right or whatever, and just was
Just
what if
go
I
to
just go down
Cumberland
this
Island.
way?
Oh, it's good. I did get to go to St. Mary's on book tour. I just took a day and went, and it's such a little ghost town too. There's nobody there, so it was kind of nice.
It's funny, before this, before I knew that Gina was going to ask me to do this, I had actually been talking to my daughter's best friends, and they were like, we just went to St. Mary's and it's amazing and you have to go there. Stop going to Tybee. Start going to St. Mary's. So we were like, maybe we'll do that.
There's a cemetery there, a historic cemetery, and I took their they do a ghost tour there. So I used their ghost tour true facts from their ghost tour to populate the ghost tour, Rosie's ghost tours in Reverie.
Rosie. So is there's a ghost,
Wandering Mary is totally out of my head.
Okay. I was like, who's really is
Wandering Mary is every female on every ghost tour ever. There's always a Wandering Mary, some woman who's just waiting on the, and you don't know really anything about her, and she's in this little unmarked grave somewhere, and nobody knows why. That's always the woman's story. Why? And I wanted all of my female characters to go, why? Why do we know? Who are you, and why are you buried out here all by yourself? And
Speaking of women, one of the things I really liked about the three main characters, the women, is they sort of buck the trend of their time periods. Yes. Cleo, you'll learn just by reading the first few pages, is she's there because she's going to get herself, in 1932, she was something. She's going to get herself a place to stay, and she's just going to be an artist for the rest of her life. And Frances sort of bucks the trend, and she's going to be something.
She's a college graduate.
College graduate in 1950. Yeah. And you have Audrey, who is basically a woman living alone, running a business,
running a con. She's running a con. So she developed, and this is accidental, and she feels bad about it and doesn't want to do it, but she does it for a little bit and then realizes, gee, this is not great. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. She takes pictures with that little brownie camera and develops an accidental exposure, double exposure. And there's a face in her photograph of one of the boys that disappeared in 1932. And everybody in town thinks she's raised a ghost, and then they all want a picture with him. And she knows how to do it again. She can recreate it, and so they're selling them and using this kid that died. And to begin with, it's a lot of fun. Everybody's excited, and then it starts to eat at her. Who, really, should I really be doing this? And what really happened to this guy? And you find out at the end of the novel what really happened to him.
What really happened to him, yeah.
But it's not a good story, and that's really what the whole book is about. Stop and think. Something that looks so innocent, something that looks like it's just a lot of fun, right? Maybe not so much if you take a closer look.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the morning glory seeds. You're going to have to ask.
I had to Google that too. I was like, so there's discussion about morning glory throughout, and I don't want to hear any stories of y'all going out and getting some, but apparently morning glories will give you have some hallucinogenic. Okay, maybe I'm the only one in the room who didn't know this.
Who knows? Who does know this? Does anybody actually know this already before we talk about it? Good, I'm glad. Okay. No?
So apparently it has some hallucinogenic properties to it. And there is discussion, Cleo's grandfather, it becomes addicted to it. But he's also an artist, right? Anyway, I thought I was like, this has to be, it has to be a symbol for something. No, it is just a drug.
It's both. It's both. I am I am a writer. It has to be a metaphor as well. So the deal was, I knew that Cleo really idolizes her grandfather, and he is this Scotch-Irish guy who's maybe not all he's cracked up to be, and he's friends with a man who marries into the Carnegie family, who then builds him a little cottage so that he can paint. He's a watercolor artist. Really, he's just a bit of a con man and a big talker. Right?
Yes.
They like sharing stories and being big talkers together. And so they've found a way he's that guy that everybody loves. He's charming and you really like being around him, but he's kind of useless. And so everybody's always floating him because he doesn't have a job and that's who Dooley Woodbine is. But Cleo's little and she doesn't know that. He's her granddaddy and she thinks the world of him. And he teaches her to paint, and he puts morning glory seeds in his paint water for his watercolors, and he tells her that's the magic in his paintings, which seems so charming, right? And when you're little, you believe it. Yeah. So Cleo has a tragic childhood. Her parents die young, and she has imaginary friends that are the characters from her grandfather's folklore after that tragedy, after they die. And then as a young woman, after the events in 1932, they return and they walk around the island with her. And she may or may not be a little off her rocker.
She's not partaking in glory?
What she figures out along the way is that the morning glory seeds, and the reason that her grandmother really despised that he did this, was because morning glory seeds have the same properties as LSD. And Dooley was drinking his water. When you're an artist and you aren't all you're cracked up to be, sometimes you do things to try and inspire yourself and inspire a little creativity. And I did not want him to be that stereotypical moonshine drinking Appalachian grandfather. So I was looking for something that would cause hallucinations, but that was a little more creative than that. But also, I wanted it to be something that was readily available and just seemed very benign, benevolent even. And when it came to Cleo and Cleo's misuse of glory and some mistakes she makes with glory, although, by the way, glory you can't, I couldn't help myself. It's a Southern fiction, yes. And glory's a dangerous thing.
It is. That's why I just assumed it was a metaphor until toward the end of the book.
I didn't want her to be, there's so many characters, so many witch books, right? Where you got the lady that knows all the herbal things and she's growing her garden and it's all charming and that's fine. I love a witch book. But I wanted her to be real. I wanted it to be more plain, I guess. More like you can comprehend this. I could go out and do this myself. It's not magic. And I knew that my grandmother hated morning glory growing in her garden and would dig it up, and it made me mad when I was little. So I had already kind of thought about something like that. And when I went to look specifically for something that was real and that just would cause a hallucination, and that popped up, I was like, well, there it is. There's the weed. If my grandmother had only known, right? But there was also, like, I can remember trumpet vine, I think is what it's called. It would grow on our fence rows that would make the cows sick, and my grandfather getting rid of that. So I knew those kinds of things, and I wanted it to be something that was really out there that he would know about on a farm somewhere that was easily accessible, not something in a grimoire, right? So, yeah, morning glory seeds, I had a good time with that.
Yeah, I mean, and because you called it glory, I just assumed it was a metaphor. And then I don't know why I looked it up, but I looked it up and I was like, what?
I know.
So one of the questions I want to ask you, because the building is going to close.
They're going to kick us out.
Is what you're working on next, because you only have 2 books before this that I can go back and read. So
Thanks for mentioning that. I write really slow. I write so slow.
that's okay. I read slow.
Oh man. But I am. We've turned in a proposal. I'm waiting on an offer right now. So just a couple of years for the next one. It is another dual timeline. I cannot stop myself. But this one is set in Asheville, North Carolina. So I'm moving away from the coast. We'll see if I can stick to it, because for some reason all my stories drag me down to the coast. It is about 2 spinster sisters who have been living together in their family home for 30 years, refusing to speak to one another.
Oh, that's awesome.
And right, that's enough, right? So when in 1926, they're in love with the same young man. They go to a party at the Biltmore. There's a big party in the basement. If you've ever been there, you've seen the Halloween room. So that was a New Year's Eve party. It was a gypsy themed party. And they attend that party. And the next morning, the oldest sister is supposed to marry this boy, and he leaves her jilted at the altar. And the sisters know why. They know what happened to him, and this is why they haven't spoken in 30 years. So in 1964, they're elderly, and they are leaving their family home for the last time. It's been sold on the courthouse steps, and the new owner shows up. And guess who it is? And when they open the door and see him, he does not appear to have aged a day. And so they have to figure out, what did they do back in 1926? Yeah. It's called the Winter Bees. Winter Bees. And if you know anything about winter bees, you'll start to get a clue.
Oh,
I know.
I'll Google that after. Well, Kimberly, thank you so much.
This was fun.
I hope so. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we've...
Did anybody have any questions before we wrap for Kimberly?
Can I ask a question about this
River
one?
Witch, yeah.
Yeah. At the end of it,
No.
'cause you said, especially after she said you start at the end, but why did that go like that? I didn't understand. I'm sorry. I was mad.
I know. This is the problem with literary fiction. No, I was mad too.
So wait, how did he? Because there wasn't gunshot.
Well,
We don't want. It's just. Cannot tell you. I'll tell you later after. But I did leave it a little bit up to you. I left it up to the reader a little bit there. There are multiple possibilities, and I will say this: I'd like a little ambiguity at the ends of all of my novels. I like to give the reader the choice. Do you want it to be a magical reason, or do you want it to be something that's completely explained and wrapped up? And some days I like the wrapped up version, and some days I like the magical version, and I think it's okay to have a little of both.
Yeah, that's where how I ended it myself. But
There you go. You get an A+. But I was mad too. Thank you.
Say that we do, if you haven't visited our bookseller that we have on site, we have the Book Bird, you can wave. They are great, graciously come out to sell copies of the book, and then we'll have Kimberly sign copies as well for you. But thank you. Please take a cookie for a midnight snack, and thanks so much for coming. All right.